I'm Grant Walker. Welcome to Heads Up for Monday the 18th of May. I'll be back with the last call for you today at 4. To insurance news, the New Zealand arm of insurance company Cigna Corporation is but a speck in its 30-country empire. But the president, David Cordani, says Aotearoa is a useful test market for his company. Visiting the country last week, Mr. Cordani says the New Zealand business is growing at a pleasing annual rate of 10%. It faces similar trends affecting the rest of the Western world, including an ageing population and escalating healthcare costs. Cigna, which ranks 97th in the Fortune 500 and has a market capitalization of almost $34 billion, sees tremendous opportunities in coming up with products to address the problems these trends create. Even by New Zealand standards, the Cigna operations here are small. New Zealand Chief Executive Lance Walker says his company accounted for about 8% of new business in the life, accident and trauma insurance categories last year and has considerably less than 10% of in-force policies. But the company is active in trying out new products, including Countdown Insurance, launched last November, which is marketed to the supermarket chain's customers via its one-card loyalty scheme. Although the attempt by Countdown's rival Foodstuffs to establish a supermarket-based bank, Superbank, in New Zealand failed, Mr. Walker says Countdown's Australian parent, Woolworths, has had a strong insurance offering for some time. Another recent product launch was Cigna Travel Insurance, which is aimed at the over 50s who can often find it difficult to get travel insurance, particularly when they have pre-existing conditions. Mr. Walker says one thing his company is investigating at the moment is the possibility of offering services that might help those suffering from cancer, still one of the major causes of health problems. Cigna's flagship product is its funeral insurance policy. Unlike most of the industry in New Zealand, Cigna markets directly to consumers here rather than selling through insurance brokers or agents. While that does not eliminate broker-induced churn, it means the company has to spend a hefty amount on marketing and advertising, and Cigna is one of the largest users of direct response television. Mr. Walker says using third parties such as brokers and agents to sell insurance can result in conflicts of interest related to the amount brokers are paid and the most suitable policy for the customer. He says Cigna products are typically more affordable than those sold through brokers. And an increasing number of policies are being sold online. Close to half Cigna's life business is sold over the internet now. In tech news, former fund manager Simon Botherway and ex-Westpac boss Simon Clare are backing the global goals of a Kiwi email marketing startup. Co-founder and chief executive Nick Lissette says Black Pearl Mail believes there is a big opportunity in helping companies use their everyday email communications as a marketing channel. With more than 100 billion emails sent every day, it makes sense to make the most of every message. Mr. Lissette says the average white-collar employee sends about 10,000 emails a year, and that's growing. It's a huge growth market, and it seems almost unbelievable it hasn't yet been tapped. Mr. Lissette has gathered some skilled partners to develop the opportunity, including software entrepreneurs Shane Bruns and Simon Raymer, whose corporate expense management firm SpendVision was sold to British services giant Hogg Robinson in 2012. Mr. Bruns has been there from day dot, according to Mr. Lissette, signing up as a director in November 2012, while Mr. Raymer joined the board in December 2013. Mr. Lissette says, so we started off at ground zero with guys who've been there, done that, and built up a multi-million-dollar company and exited successfully. Myself, to a far lesser degree, has built companies up and sold them, so we're familiar with the process and had a little cash to get things underway. Their efforts have built an online service allowing companies to design bespoke marketing materials and branding into every email their employees send. Background analytics then measure how those messages are used, such as when the email is opened and who clicks through to other website materials. The software ensures all email graphics look right on any device, from desktop computers to mobile phones. Without it on mobiles, email branding can sometimes look a little bit like a dropped pie. The business model is software as a service, or SaaS, so customers pay a monthly fee to use it. The current pricing is US $15 a month for up to 15 users and US $1 for each extra user after that. Companies with large numbers of staff can access different terms. Let's talk tax. Inland Revenue has been gathering evidence using covert visits, including staff posing as customers and business walk-bys as part of its tax compliance investigations. But it's refusing to comment on how widespread the application of undercover investigations are, saying it will not disclose specifics of how it investigates potential compliance issues. Documents provided to NBR online show an IRD investigator's evidence against a business over cash reporting and tax compliance includes notes from cover visits and walk-bys. The documents show the investigator visited the business a number of times, initially covertly, and only once as an official unannounced spot check declared to the business. In total, about 90% of the visits were covertly conducted. The notes are extensive, counting staff numbers, customer numbers, stock, as well as cash and FPOS transactions and how they're handled. An IRD spokeswoman says it has systems, tools and techniques to help determine the best action to take when investigating potential compliance issues. But due to customer confidentiality, it's unable to discuss individual cases. The spokeswoman says to protect the integrity of our work, we would not disclose specifics about the techniques and methods we utilise. What we can say is we tailor our approach depending on the particular circumstances to ensure taxpayers meet their tax obligations. The IRD did not respond to questions over how widespread the COVID investigations may be or how much it costs. But specialist tax lawyer Jeff Clues, who has more than 30 years' experience, says he has probably had about 6 cases in the past 2 or 3 years in which evidence was gathered undercover by the IRD. He says he does not find the practice surprising and believes most taxpayers would be happy to see non-compliant entities investigated in such a way for the purposes of recovering tax. Last week, the IRD heralded the early success of its Declare It All or Risk Everything campaign, which is a crackdown on ensuring tradies declare cashies. The campaign, which has identified tradespeople as being a high-risk sector for tax evasion, is running in Auckland's Flatbush, Takanini, Silverdale and Albany suburbs, but may be rolled out to other areas. Last year, the IRD got back about $6 for every dollar invested in its hidden economy program. The IRD spokeswoman says it encourages people to talk to it early if they're facing tax difficulties. The IRD says it's very difficult to get away with not meeting your tax obligations.
NBR Radio with Bayleys, New Zealand's leading commercial real estate company.
All right, let's check those housing changes. Next week's government budget will include extra measures to ensure people buying and selling residential property for profit, including overseas buyers, pay their fair share of tax, according to the Prime Minister, John Key. The new measures will include introducing a new bright line test to tax gains from residential properties sold within 2 years of purchase, unless it's the seller's main home, inherited or transferred in a relationship property settlement. The bright line test adds to the current IRD intentions test, and property bought with the intention of being sold for profit will still attract tax even after the 2-year cut-off of the new test. Requiring non-residents and New Zealanders buying and selling any property other than their main home to provide a New Zealand IRD number. Requiring non-residents to have a New Zealand bank account to get a New Zealand IRD number. Providing Inland Revenue with $29 million extra funding for compliance and enforcement. Labour's Jacinda Ardern and Michael Wood were quick to imply National had appropriated Labour's capital gains tax policy from last year's election, which ironically new leader Andrew Little has parked. Mr Wood tweeted, "I think we claim this is a win." However, he noted it was not clear what level the tax would be set at. However, NBR economics editor Rob Hosking says this isn't a capital gains tax, and it's a bit of political mischief to call it a capital gains tax. But it is a backdown, he said, both on how investment property is taxed and on overseas buyers of property. Only a few months ago, National said no change was needed in either area. It's quite a major U-turn by National to bring in these changes now, according to Mr Hosking. He says it also looks a bit panicky. Why not wait until budget day this Thursday, he added. The move to identify foreign buyers follows comments from Reserve Bank Governor Graham Wheeler on Thursday that it would be helpful if the government finally set aside its objection to collecting data on foreign home buyers. Finance Minister Bill English has previously rejected any form of tracking as impractical and ineffective. Mr Key's comments follow those by Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse at the weekend, who said the government was considering awarding points to immigrants who pledged to settle outside Auckland under the points-based entry system. In People News, NZX has appointed Aaron Jenkins to head up its funds management businesses, including Superlife and SmartShares. Mr Jenkins has headed up NZX Market since January, and before this was a general manager at Fonterra. He's also held senior roles with E-Trade, one of Australia's largest non-banking financial services businesses. Since joining NZX, he's driven the design and regulatory approval of the new NZXT market, helped introduce equity derivatives and options, better futures, and launched 5 new SmartShares exchange-traded funds. Mr Jenkins will focus on expanding Superlife's KiwiSaver and employer superannuation activities. NZX acquired fund manager Superlife this year for $20 million in cash and shares, with a potential further earnings payout of $15 million. The stock market operator wants to use Superlife as a platform to accelerate growth of its Smart Shares exchange-traded funds. NZX Chief Executive Tim Bennett says Aaron's diverse background across financial services and technology makes him the ideal candidate for this role. His existing knowledge of the NZX and Superlife businesses means he will be able to make a quick start in the role. The former managing principal of ANZ Securities, Mark Peterson, will take over the head of markets role responsible for the debt and equity capital markets. Mr. Peterson will also look after NZX's relationships with issuers and market participants. The appointments are effective from June 2. In legal news, a solicitor who cannot be named has been sued after a joint venture with his client failed. The case is shrouded in secrecy, with the names of the parties on both sides suppressed by Associate Judge Warwick Smith. However, according to a recent decision from the High Court at Auckland, a couple known only as Mr. and Mrs. A and their associated trust took action against their former lawyer. The couple wants about $2.1 million from the lawyer and a family trust entity associated with him. They want orders saying shareholders in one of the companies known only as C Limited should be theirs. The mystery lawyer, who had been representing the couple for about 5 years, counterclaimed for $2.5 million. The lawyer and his trust said they lost millions in their investment in C Limited and should receive damages for the lawyer's loss of income, goodwill and reputation. The couple wanted to strike out the counterclaim, but Associate Judge Smith has declined to do so, indicating the defence may have a shot at trial. According to the decision, Mr. and Mrs. H are citizens of different foreign countries who arrived in New Zealand in 2006. Their lawyer had given investment advice, tax advice and helped document trusts. The couple invested through a family trust named as the XYZ Family Trust in the judgment. The judge said it was not necessary to detail the various investments. The decision says it's enough to say that they failed, and it appears that most, if not all, of the money invested by Mr. and Mrs. H through the XYZ Family Trust has been lost. The pair did not take independent legal advice, but paid about $1.585 million between August 2011 and December 2012. On December 12, 2012, the solicitor withdrew from the joint venture. The lawyer and co-defendants deny the various allegations and said the funds that Mr. and Mrs. H used were unlawfully obtained because they broke foreign tax laws. Mr. and Mrs. H deny these claims. The lawyer says he knew about this because he'd advised the pair on the transaction after it was completed. His argument was that the funds were illegally obtained funds and this tainted the transactions. The High Court said the defence of illegality based on the ex turpi causa doctrine, the rule which says one cannot take legal action if a claim relates to illegal acts, was arguable. While a recent UK court decision had shone light on the doctrine, it would be inappropriate to decide at the preliminary stage. The judge said this is a developing area of law and that the precise metes and bounds or limits of the ex turpi causa doctrine in New Zealand have not been authoritatively settled. In those circumstances, I'm not satisfied that it would be appropriate to strike out the defendant's defence based on alleged illegality under foreign country A's law. Now, if you want the full decision, just go to nbr.co.nz.
NBR Radio. With the Property Press. It's out now to show you around.
I'm Grant Walker with Heads Up. Here's what's trending on NBR Online. We look at the new housing tax policy and some reaction to it. The new possible immigration policy. Cygnus sees us as a test market. The IRD gets covert. And what should we do about zombies? If you're travelling today, Auckland, cloudy and a bit wet, fine in Wellington, Christchurch, fine, and Dunedin, cold, windy and a bit wet. To find out more on our stories, log on to nbr.co.nz or stay tuned. Those stories coming up next on NBR Radio. To Winston and Auckland housing. New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters said on TVNZ's Q&A program there's a day of reckoning coming for us, sad to say. A lot of people in Auckland are about to lose their equity in their homes as they did in 2007 and 8 when the market collapsed. He said now a wise government would step in and try and stabilise things, cut back on demand, stop offshore buying. Second thing is cut back on this massive immigration, which is not about production. Remember this, it's about consumption. The government announced tighter rules for foreign buyers and house flippers yesterday, but it's the Reserve Bank Act and land bankers who are in Mr. Peters' sights. The Northland MP said, number one, I'd change the Reserve Bank Act to reflect that we are as much now as we ever were an export-dependent economy. You lower interest rates effectively, but you do not allow the sort of bench speculation that comes from that to happen. When asked whether he would legislate to force land bankers to give up their land, Mr. Peters said, Hong Kong does. Hong Kong says, oh yes, you can come in and you can land develop, but if you don't develop off the plans you gave us with the permission you asked for within 2 years, bang, you've lost that right. He said, but we won't as a parliament take any steps at all because we're too scared of what you might call unbridled capitalism in this country, which is not working for about 90% of New Zealanders. And we have that full interview, so just go to nbr.co.nz. Catherine Rich cleared of those allegations. The Auditor-General has cleared Food and Grocery Council Chief Executive Catherine Rich of conflict of interest allegations arising from the dirty politics affair. Complaints were made that she was compromised as a member of the Health Promotion Agency, or HPA, which backed public campaigns that may affect the activities of companies selling alcohol, tobacco and other products. In a letter to HPA Chairwoman Dr. Lee Matthias, Acting Assistant Auditor General Edric Child says after considering the issues raised and looking at relevant documentation, the office has decided there are no issues to investigate further. The inquiry included interviews with Dr. Matthias and Chief Executive of the HPA, but not Mrs. Rich. It said, we're satisfied that there are no matters we need to investigate further. We have not identified problems with the management of conflicts of interest by the HPA. Mr. Child says a conflict of interest does not arise simply from a person's background or their involvement in a sector or industry. He said rather it's necessary to point to a specific connection between the person's other interest and a particular matter or decision coming before the public entity. He says it's too simplistic to assume the aims and activities of the HPA and FGC are incontrovertibly opposed and utterly incompatible. It went on, for a problem to arise, there would have to be some particular substantive act or decision of the HPA board that clearly affected or was affected by something arising out of Ms. Rich's FGC role. The letter concludes by saying Mrs. Rich made a full disclosure before she was appointed by the government and that the office would not investigate other matters raised in dirty politics. In immigration news, National is looking to give extra points to immigration investors, entrepreneurs and skilled migrants willing to settle outside Auckland to help regional development. Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse says that could happen in the next few months. Despite his plan for awarding extra points to potential immigrants who settle outside New Zealand's largest city, Mr. Woodhouse says he is unconcerned about the number of migrants staying in Auckland, saying it's about right. The government is confident it's building enough infrastructure for the number of people arriving in New Zealand, even though the number of houses built in Auckland is not keeping pace with population growth. Mr. Woodhouse says historic high immigration numbers are no problem. He won't give a Goldilocks number, but says we've got the settings right. He says a long bow to draw to say immigration is contributing to Auckland housing crisis when fewer people are gaining residence and fewer houses have been built due to bureaucratic issues. Mr. Woodhouse says, I cannot see for the life of me why an increase in the number of German backpackers going to Queenstown is actually having an impact on the Auckland housing market. When you talk about the 56,000 positive net migration number, he says you're talking about those backpackers, those students studying in Invercargill, and they're not putting pressure on the Auckland housing market. Mr. Woodhouse says the $33 million spend on stopping overstayers an appropriate investment in Budget 2015, despite National saying it has little to spend and New Zealand's overstaying rates being very low by international standards. Mr. Woodhouse says immigration officials who used information from the Ministry of Education to track down overstayers through the children overstepped the mark. Both the Ministry of Education and Immigration New Zealand erred in that point. Fewer people are gaining residence in New Zealand than 10 years ago, he says. And for the full transcript, you can go to nbr.co.nz.
NBR Radio. With Clooney Restaurant now offering Auckland's most exclusive private dining room. NBR Radio.
To the world week ahead. With increasing evidence the US economy is not recovering as quickly as initially thought from a sluggish first quarter, Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen's speech on Friday will be watched very closely. Investors are increasingly less sure how the Fed is interpreting the latest data, with concerns rising that perhaps Yellen and her colleagues have been too optimistic. Other Fed officials speaking this week include Chicago Fed President Charles Evans today and again on Wednesday, as well as Fed Vice Chair Stanley Fischer and San Francisco Fed President John Williams on Thursday. Also to be scrutinised will be the Federal Open Market Committee minutes from the April meeting, when the Fed's top policymakers left open the door for a June interest rate increase. The minutes will be released on Wednesday. Last Friday, reports showed the US consumer confidence unexpectedly sank in May, posting the largest drop in 2 years, with the University of Michigan preliminary index of sentiment sliding to the lowest level since October. Separately, industrial output unexpectedly fell in April, and manufacturing in the New York region grew at a pace that fell short of expectations this month. Wall Street moved higher, pushing the S&P 500 to a record high, with the Fed's currency policy seen intact at least for a few more months. So for the week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 0.45%, the S&P 500 gained 0.31%, and the Nasdaq Composite advanced 0.89%. US Treasuries finished the week with a rebound following a sell-off days earlier sparked by the Eurozone bond market. However, fresh signs that the Fed is unlikely to move interest rates soon supported the appeal of US government debt. The coming days will offer a fresh update on the still sluggish US real estate market. The housing market index due today, followed by housing starts on Tuesday and existing home sales Thursday. Other reports scheduled for release include weekly jobless claims, Chicago Fed National Activity Index, Philadelphia Fed Business Outlook Survey and leading indicators due Thursday, as well as the CPI and PMI Manufacturing Index due on Friday. And after Friday's disappointment in consumer sentiment, several key retailers are set to report their latest quarterly earnings in the coming days, with both Walmart and Home Depot set for Tuesday, followed by Lowe's on Wednesday. In Europe, the Stoxx 600 declined 0.9% last week. UK's FTSE shed 1.2%. Eurozone bonds dropped as well, pushing yields on the benchmark German 10-year Bund 8 basis points higher to 0.63%. And reports scheduled for release this week include the Eurozone trade balance, Eurozone CPI, and Germany's ZEW economic sentiment due Tuesday. Germany's producer price index due Wednesday, Eurozone manufacturing and services PMI data and Eurozone current account and Eurozone consumer confidence due Thursday. Germany's GDP and Germany IFO data also due on Thursday. Let's talk zombies. The country is grappling with regional economy zombies, but the solution is far from easy. However, the majority of NBR member subscribers say the budget should include agriculture and tourism measures to stimulate regional New Zealand. This backs Grant Thornton partner Kim Keenan's hypothesis that unless the government looks at ways of making the provinces more attractive for investors, skilled workers and university graduates, there's an increasing danger the zombie regions will become more prevalent. Mr. Keenan says that while Auckland and Christchurch are living up to rockstar economy status, the regions, Northland, Hawke's Bay, Gisborne, Manawatu, Bulla and North Otago, are merely groupies. Falling dairy and oil prices, doubts over the aluminium smelter and a stubbornly strong dollar against trading partners all pulling the region's performance down. Mr. Keenan says there are enough early economic warning signs to indicate we're coming off the rockstar peak as a nation. The impacts are being felt both socially and economically in the regional areas in both islands. Without the roadies and the groupies, the rock stars cannot play to their full potential. He says to get the New Zealand economy into surplus and create much-needed opportunities in the regions, the 2015 budget should boost agriculture and tourism. He went on, the government needs to focus on the various economic levers it can adjust and tweak in the regional economies to encourage, attract and promote enterprise. Developing a suite of incentives for major national and international corporates will encourage them to anchor their operations into the regions. NBR subscribers largely agree. 62% think the budget needs agriculture and tourism measures to stimulate regional New Zealand.
NBR Radio. With Hotel de Brett, your home away from home, but with better service. NBR Radio.